If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. Hey, Security Weekly listeners, we are celebrating the milestone of reaching over 1,000 members of our CISO community. The Cybersecurity Collaboration Forum is a one-stop shop for executive collaboration comprised of CISOs across various industries. If you want to be part of this growing community of CISOs, join us as a member or technology partner. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity collaboration. All right. And for our second interview today, Jackie McGuire joins us to talk about the fight to curb data chaos. Jackie McGuire is a senior security strategist at Cribble. As a data scientist and thought leader, Jackie writes, speaks, and memes about security. I love that part of the bio. Prior to joining Cribble, Jackie was a research analyst with S&P Global within the same group that I used to work for, 451 Research, but not at the same time. We didn't overlap. Covering technologies including SIM, SOAR, and XDR. As a data scientist, Jackie developed behavior analysis and anomaly detection models for a SIM, and she's also been a co-founder, CEO, and CFO for several startups. And before her work in technology was a licensed securities broker and SEC-registered investment advisor. I usually don't spend that much time on bios, but it was all interesting, so I had to keep it all in. Welcome to the show, Jackie.
Thank you. Yeah, I often refer to myself as fully weaponized ADHD. So I've done a lot of things.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I also have the ADHD, so I appreciate that. That's great. So
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Really looking forward to this conversation. And when I was an analyst at 451, and I used to talk about the future of security, do kind of like the, decade plus roadmap, like where are we going, what's coming next and what's not coming at all. I always predicted data security would be the very last thing that we would really try to effectively tackle. It looked like, especially if you're starting a startup, you gotta, most people don't choose DLP. Like that's a really hard thing to build. And even though we've seen many generations of it, I don't think anybody thinks of it fondly. Like when you talk about data security, people immediately their minds go to DLP, and generally that does not bring up the fondest memories. And it's just because it has to be convenient to use for us to be productive. And attaching any controls to data tends to take away that convenience and the ability to be productive with it. So that's the reason I was predicting like this would be one of the last things that we tackle, or at least the last thing that we get right.
Oh yeah, get right for sure, right? And I think if you're trying, and part of it is because this is kind of the smallest unit of measurement, right? So we're trying to address things at kind of a cellular level when we're talking about data, and DLP I think addresses the other side of the equation, but doesn't actually start to address the data creation problem, which is and to your point, it's this balance that we're constantly trying to strike between this move fast, break things, innovate, and also maybe you should ask somebody before you park a bunch of data somewhere. So it's this constant push and pull, and we're all trying to find the right balance there, but it's a huge problem. And I think oftentimes when problems are massive and complex, people aren't really comfortable with iterative solutions. They want kind of a sweeping solution, and we're not really going to find that with data, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you hit an important point there. You said somebody deciding to park a bunch of data somewhere. I think that's one of the huge challenges here is, we tend to be over permissive with data, because trying to apply zero trust principles, least privilege, just results in pain, right? Like it's I need access to this. You didn't give me access to this. The number of your requests you're going to have to submit or pester somebody or something like that. Like most people would much rather give you access to way more than you need and not get all those extra requests for access to things. And it's and then once you have access to that data, you can download it. You can put it in your personal Dropbox. You can email it to yourself. Like there's so many ways that you can lose control of that data. And I think that's part of what makes this such a huge challenge is that in a lot of organizations, everybody's got access to everything.
Yeah, and whether they realize it or not, and sometimes people don't even understand the nature of the information that they're dealing with, right? People don't always understand the sensitivity of things. I think we've gotten better with things like PII, that we know that dates of birth and social security numbers and addresses are important. But I think in the last segment, you were just talking about session IDs. How many people know, how many people outside of security know that tokens shouldn't be shared, even know what a token is? So we oftentimes are trying to control data after it's already been created, rather than addressing it at the point of creation, which is an extremely difficult thing to do, right? It's really, really easy to say, okay, once this specific type of data is already created, here's what you can do with it. But it's really hard to identify that type of data as it's created and then put policies in place as to how it can be stored or where it can be stored. So it's a really challenging problem.
So what do you think? Like, is that the holy grail is to tag and categorize this data at the point of creation so that you don't have to do, all this guesswork, regex, classification, with ML models further on down the line?
Yeah, I think because I'm a data scientist, I always look to, this is when you have a problem that deals with massive amounts of information, because we're talking about basically all data, right? Which is currently there's like 64 to 70 zettabytes of data being created annually right now. So I think to me, the solution could also end up being a huge problem. And this is there's a constant dichotomy in security between single source of truth and single point of failure, right? So to me, the answer is each byte of data represents an actual data point, right? A date, a timestamp, it represents some value of something. And so to me, the capturing the unique value and only creating it once and then creating customers of that value so you can actually track each path data takes to other people, other places, other storage is really kind of the holy grail. But that's expensive. It's very difficult to do. But I think in the long run, once we have figured it out, it actually will save enterprises insane amounts of money. Because if you think about things like how often the same piece of data is created multiple times throughout an organization, if we can figure out how to stop that from happening and only store that data once and then distribute it, that actually saves quite a bit of storage space, compute, money, which is really the only thing that makes the world work. So, I think it's a problem that is going to be costly to solve, but once we do, we'll actually save in the long run.
Yeah, and just kind of a hot take here, but I feel like the solution it can't involve end users doing the right thing, right? Like I can't even imagine getting employees to use like file naming conventions or anything like that. Like it's got to be something that happens transparently behind the scenes, in my opinion. Any solution that's based on, oh, the user has to do this. They're not going to right click, go to properties, and type in a comment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, nor should they have to, right? Because those are the things that are really good. There's a lot of AI and machine learning right now are super hot. It's oftentimes a solution in search of a problem. But this is one case that this is actually a problem that it's a really good solution for, and that naming conventions can be repeated very easily. They can, and in fact, even if humans are really well trained, even if you have a team that's going to right click and go to properties, that doesn't mean they're not going to make a typo. And so this is a great application for, robots should probably be doing this work.
So how you download a paper, from like a research paper or something like that, and it comes with that completely useless name on it. Like it's never the title of the academic paper, right? Like it's always just like a series of numbers and letters, or like the equivalent of an ISDN, or like just a filing number. So I've been testing out a web browser called Arc, made by the browser company. And one of their new features is they will automatically rename your downloads to something useful. And they're looking at metadata or data in the file. I'm not sure exactly how they're doing it, but it freaking works. And it's like you'll get a little pop-up that says, hey, your file was renamed. And it shows you the new name that it gave the file.
Well, and think about that from a picture perspective. Right? Because how much compute power are we using every time I go into Google Photos and I search for like dog to find a picture of a dog, because all of the photos in my Google Photos are PXL timestamp something random, right? Exactly. So every time I search Google Photos, it's got to do that image analysis and it's got to go to those meta tags. Or if you would just name the file correctly in the first place, that wouldn't be a thing. So now I'm going to have to go try that out.
Sean, I think you had a question here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this was touched on a little bit already, but really the tools for protecting data is better than what it used to be, where on the fly we can adjust who has access to the document itself or documents, including we can adjust if they can edit it, they can read it, they can print it, they can copy it, they can share it. But obviously the challenge is appropriately identifying who should have access to that content. And you touched on this a little bit already, Jackie. Really, my question is, how can we leverage computers such as machine learning or AI in order to better categorize that data, so that way the automation behind it can enable who has access to what when they need to?
The answer, I think, is definitely yes. Everywhere from looking into the file and actually assessing the contents and tagging. So I personally, and I have to credit my boss with helping me develop this opinion. I think data identification and categorization is probably going to end up being its own subcategory within DLP, within data in general, because we've got this issue across a lot of areas, right? Not just like, should somebody have access to this file, but also like, oops, I dumped 400 terabytes of data into a data lake and now I don't know what any of it is, if I have the right to even hold it, like things like that. Because as we pass more regulations about, hey, you can't keep PII for longer than this amount of time, it's also like, are you holding data that you shouldn't be? So yes, it can all be accomplished. Now, the question is cost, right? Because cost is the reason that most of these problems exist in the first place, because security is something that most businesses look at as a cost center. So the goal is always do more with less, spend less on what you already have. So can we do it? Absolutely. Are we willing to commit the time and resources to doing it? I don't know. But I do think that some of the advancements we're making in things like large language models and AI, and the ability to create an internal large language model at an enterprise and help categorize different kinds of data specific to that enterprise and help that language model learn and then look within documents, that would make it those types of like specific training exercises can help make it less expensive to correctly identify those things. So I think we're headed that way, but for God's sakes, most enterprises don't even require MFA. So to think that we're going to get to
right.
artificially intelligent data categorization and file naming and all, I mean, yeah. So the goal, right, is to establish like ideal best practices so that as companies start to set themselves up from scratch over the next couple decades, we'll gradually get better, right?
Absolutely. I'm certain that the intelligence of my phone would end up naming photos dog, parens open, 1, close parens, open parens 2, close parens, and things like that. Getting back to
Machine
the
number
photo issue.
287.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And of course,
But so here's the thing, though, right? Is that where regulations and best practices and standards and all of that fail, money works. So we're starting to see things that are changing the industry, like this new SEC disclosure rule, right? So we would never have known about the Clorox breach, the Johnson controls, or how all of them are connected without this SEC regulation. I think the same thing is going to happen with data categorization and identification, because cyber insurance is getting significantly more expensive. And because actuaries, who are the statisticians within insurance companies that calculate loss and coverage and decide what to charge you for premiums to make sure the insurance company is still profitable, because they weren't experts in data, the way they value the data a company holds and the way they value the potential loss of that data has not necessarily been accurate. So one of the things I think is going to start to change is how we value data as an asset and as a liability. And categorization and identification will be absolutely critical for that, because a social security number is a lot more valuable than a port number, right? So it's not just I'm insuring X zettabytes of data, it's I'm insuring 10 gigabytes of critical data, and I think that's part of what's going to start to happen is for financial regulations are generally what causes things to change, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think you made a great point there. There's different types of data that has different levels of value. And certainly organizations have data everywhere. They're on file shares, they're in Dropbox, they are probably in also Amazon buckets, S3 buckets, they're in Azure cloud storage blobs, it's in SharePoint, it's everywhere. And so companies don't even always know where their data actually is. So that's kind of one challenge of it, is that not knowing where the data is. Plus, like you said, this data is getting generated. Some of the problems around where the data is can be handled through some policy and even some technology about pushing into a specific place to hold that data. And there's regulatory things around that as well. But I'm going to ask the question because I was dared to. Is any aspect of the problem that we're having with data, can any of it be solved with blockchain? Because I am looking for a solution for this technology.
So funny enough, my boss and I had a conversation about this interview before, and I said, I kind of want to mention that this is one of the things that I thought blockchain was actually a really good application for. And he was like, don't talk about blockchain. I was like, but I don't mean cryptocurrency. Because to be fair, because I've spent 15 years in Wall Street and finance, I've never believed that. I believed it would take something seismic for crypto to get traction, only because, again, money makes the world go round, and there is a hell of a lot of money and lobbying power behind not distributing the power in finance. But blockchain, distributed ledgers, the ability to create a unique ID for a piece of data and go to the closest place that data is stored to access it and make sure that data can't be altered or replicated without. I do think that this is a really good application for blockchain. And I've been a huge believer in blockchain for a number of different reasons. Another thing is compute power, right? So think about how many smart devices and cell phones and just connected devices that have some level of compute power you have sitting around your house. Not everything needs to be done in a data center. There's a lot of compute power that you're using in a data center that's causing pollution that you could be doing around your house. So I do think that there are really, really realistic applications for distributed compute, distributed ledger, and blockchain in this area. I just hate that anytime you mention it, it gets conflated with cryptocurrency, because that's a very specific application of blockchain, or NFTs, because everybody's bitter about their use of their worthless NFTs now. But if you could kind of separate out all of those things, yes.
Yeah, so I was being a little whimsical with the question, certainly, because many people have different opinions on blockchain, and like you said, many point directly to crypto as the purpose of blockchain. But I think you're right. I think there are some situations where you need an immutable ledger around tracking the history of a specific file or files. And again, getting back to all data doesn't have the same value, whether it's intrinsic or explicit value, to almost the eye of the beholder, right? Because there's certain things attackers are going after because they're like, this is something that's incredibly valuable to us, but it may not be seen as high in priority or value to the organization itself. My next question,
Right.
though, pivoting from that, is how do you think organizations can actually start solving this when they have file shares and they have different cloud storage devices or storage systems for files that users are creating, as well as a number of other cloud systems that are maybe portals like SharePoint? How do you think they can start kind of wrapping their arms and hands around this?
I think generally the answer for starting to address tech debt is it's actually the same answer to when I was a financial advisor. It's the same answer for starting to address your actual debt, which is one, you have to change how you do things right now and going forward. And then you have to start to go backwards and address the problems that you created doing things in a different way. So I think one is that we need to develop significantly better policies around data creation. So if you are going to be storing something on you have the ability now to sync endpoints with the cloud. So I think there are ways for enterprises through like Google Drive and things like that to say, I need to be able to look at everything that you're creating in terms of data on an endpoint and then have some way to categorize that data. And then once you've done that, then you can start saying, okay, because we now have better policies in place for how we're creating data, we can now go back through the data that we're storing and decide, do we still need to be storing it? If we do, how many different copies of this IP address exist, and do they all actually need to exist? But then I don't even know if I should bring this up. The other issue is that you could have the same IP twice and it actually means two different things, right? So the other issue is that you have to come up with some way to figure out when data actually should be duplicated, which I don't even begin to know how to address. That's why I didn't remain a data scientist.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the things that I talk about a lot within my company, Trimark, is really about having a source of truth for a specific data point or data record. So where can someone find this thing that is authoritative for this subject or whatever it is, even if there's other things elsewhere that people might generate or create? And I think you're right. There's got to be a few different approaches to how data is created, how it's stored, almost like the life cycle of data, sort of like the life cycle of an identity, which is something I focus on a lot. But the other challenge around this is, I mean, there's so many file shares out there that are just open to everyone on the corporate network. And because people don't necessarily understand who should have access to it, I actually made a big mistake many years ago and early in my career. I was trying to lock down permissions on shares, and I ended up locking out everybody, including myself. Thankfully, I did this on a Saturday, but it was a 10-hour mistake that I ended up having to undo. And the only way I could do that is because I did have something that I had set up initially as an emergency fix it. What's that?
I said that was true zero trust.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, absolutely zero trust. But
yeah, that's the problem though, right? Is it's painful. Like, and this is, I've had, God, I can't even tell you how many times I've had this conversation at different companies I worked at, and then like, yes, this is a big problem, but it's only going to get bigger. And so at some point you have to rip the Band-Aid off. And does that involve potentially locking down some file share systems where people lose access to the things they need? It might. And that's the problem right now, right? Is that we don't really have great controls over our data. Like the reason I took the job at the company that I work for is because it's kind of like this universal pipeline for data. And I was actually talking to a customer earlier today who was talking about trying to replace their SIM. And they were saying, like replacing a SIM is incredibly difficult because you either have to take the new SIM and get it all the way embedded into your enterprise. And then the stand-up failure rate for SIM is like close to 50%. So you're taking a 50% chance that it's not going to work, and then you're going to have to figure out how to rip the whole thing back out, deal with all the data that was created. And what the company I work for does is it creates pipelines that would allow you to just fork the data going to your current SIM to a new one instead of having to use all their collectors and stuff. And like that's kind of like, until we get a better control over how data is even allowed to flow through an enterprise, like that's one of the biggest issues, right? Is that like when you have all these open file shares and you have a breached endpoint, and all of a sudden somebody starts moving a whole bunch of stuff, like the only way we're really detecting that stuff right now is user and entity behavior analytics, sometimes like hard-coded data size transfer limits, but there's really not a great way to do that. So until you have better visibility into what data is flowing and where, which most enterprises just aren't monitoring today.
Yeah, and it's hard to monitor too. And I would say ransomware is how most organizations realize that they have a data access problem. And that's the reality. Yeah. It's unfortunate though, but that's going back to this convenience debt, this technical debt. That's where we've been, is that these things have just kind of been ignored. Like, yeah, the data's there somewhere. Someone's using it. Someone's doing something with it. It'll be fine. Everything's fine here.
Yeah. Well, and like the National Cybersecurity Strategy that the Biden administration released, they basically were like, all federal agencies are going to address their tech debt by this year. And I just laughed, right? Like, I think everybody did, because it's like, the first job I had in data science was writing anomaly detection for a SIM. And it was this SIM that catered to banks and credit unions. And believe it or not, small banks and credit unions still use those old, like late 1970s, early 1980s IBM core banking servers. Why? Well, because your banking server has to be available 24 hours a day. How the heck do you upgrade or replace it if it needs to be available 24 hours a day and can literally never be disconnected? So we literally had customers where if somebody walked into the room that server was in and shut the wrong light switch off, an entire bank would go down. That is not hyperbole. Wow. That actually happened. So, yeah, I mean, addressing tech debt when you're talking about we have banks running on 50-year-old servers is just, until we have a law that says it has to be done, it's not going to happen, right?
So I want to challenge the statement that eventually we have to rip the Band-Aid off, because it seems like maybe intentionally or through apathy, some of these, sometimes you don't have to, right? Like if there's a big enough paradigm shift, like the move from using on-prem Windows file servers to cloud storage, right? Change the game in a lot of ways. Like I generally don't spend a whole lot of time organizing my files on my laptops and desktops anymore, because search tools are decent enough that in a second or less, because of indexing, I can find exactly what I'm looking for, because I generally know what name is going to be in the file or what metadata is going to be in the file. So I wonder if maybe that's an alternate route here, like we figure out how to do it transparently enough that behaviors don't have to be changed.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think search is the other way. You can do what you're saying. You can basically just accept that, like, we're not going to get through our data backlog. We have all of this data. It's stored in all of these different places. So the best thing that we can do is protect it, make sure nobody can get in and get to it, and then focus our energy on being able to search it. How do we search it? How do we explore it? How do we, if we need to find out whether it holds this kind of data or not, how do we figure that out? It's actually another thing that Cribble's working on. So we have a product called Search, because that was the other thing, is that we the enterprise, our ability to generate data has completely outstripped our ability to draw value from a lot of that data, to protect that data, to, analyze that data. And so AI and machine learning and data lakes and these massive data storages is really the only way that we're handling it now. But there are very few good, cost-effective ways to search those things. So, I will give you that. Maybe you don't have to completely rip the Band-Aid off. You just have to find a way to peek underneath it every once in a while and make sure it's not infected. I don't know.
and searching across those disparate systems is virtually impossible too. Searching across file shares, searching across the Microsoft platform and AWS and others, and finding where that data is incredibly challenging. And there's another impact to this as well that we've seen a lot on our security assessments that we do for customers is older appliances, device appliances that are storage appliances that hold these files and shares. There's so many files and documents on these appliances that they cannot easily be shifted over or upgraded, which means that it holds back the security of the enterprise because it's an older version, it can't be upgraded, and it doesn't support the more recent security protocols. So there's there's also this kind of monster under the bed or in the closet as well, using the fact that Halloween was this week. There's a lot of problems when it comes to this data situation that we have.
Yeah, and that I know of, Cribble Search is actually one of, I think it's the only kind of federated search that can go across all of the different cloud providers on-prem, and you're right, there are not, and we're still, it's a new product, we just launched it last year, so we're still kind of building it out. So the end vision of the product is this full visibility, because what it can do is search data at rest. Because the other thing is, like, even if you know where stuff is, if you have stuff in like cold storage, it can be extremely expensive to search that. And a lot of times, previous solutions, you had to rehydrate the whole thing. And I always call it, like, one of the real kicks in the pants after you get breached is that when your incident response contractor comes in, you have to pay insane amounts of money to pull all these different data sources in just for them to start looking through them, which is also probably going to cost a lot of money. So that's kind of the goal of search, is like, let's make it so that you can search data at rest, get the results, only pay to move the results, and then not have to pay to move or sort through all of this data. But yeah, it's incredibly difficult. And then, the other thing that the product uses that drew me to the company is that we have the ability to kind of take all of these different old school data sources that are coming out of this legacy technology and turn it into something you can read, right? Take syslog and turn it into JSON so you can actually look at it, those types of things. So I don't want to pitch the product. There's a reason I work here, right? There's a reason I chose to work there, but that's kind of some of the things that we and I am hoping that we can start to address, because the real thing that I saw as soon as I came to security to write data science for a SIM is like, nobody can even deal with the file formats that this data is coming in, because it wasn't written for security. It was written for developing and monitoring and things like that. So we're trying to turn these logs that were not written for this purpose into something meaningful, and that's difficult.
Yeah. I mean, and again, back to my original point about why this would be the last thing that we tackle, and it's just it's only more and more and more though. But I mean, I do have hope in things like you shared the photo search problem. It's like, how, now it's so easy for me to take photos. I can take 40 photos in a day. So how do I find that picture of my pet from 2 months ago? Like it's going to be 10 minutes of scrolling up through old pictures, but now they're using AI to recognize things in pictures, so I can search for beer to find the bottle of beer that I liked, or dog or something like that to find I think it'll even recognize pets now, where you can identify like individual.
You can name your pets, and and this is like, if you're willing to trade privacy for convenience. And in a lot of situations I am. Yeah, you could name your pets, you could name your people, and it tracks them all. It's incredibly convenient.
But naming my pets gives away my password, so I shouldn't do that.
Say again? Sorry.
Well, so that's one of the, I know we're at time, but that's one of the really interesting things about the kind of data that's valuable right now, right? Because you might think that if an attacker gets into your Slack channels, it's not a huge deal. But if I can find out some names of your pets, the coworkers you frequently, like, that all makes social engineering so much easier. So that kind of data now, your favorite brand of coffee, is now becoming significantly more valuable.
Yeah, so actually, it's a good point. When I used to train pen testers, pen testers juniors would get access to things when we were out on an engagement, and they would ask me, okay, I've got an AD account, or I'm domain admin or something like that. What now? And I would tell them to go find a file server and just start digging. And I mean, you would find executive signatures, you'd find invoices, you'd find, I mean, pretty much everything you need to watch the color drain from an executive's face in the report that you hand off, because it's just all a dumping ground. And Slack is just the latest, right?
Yeah. Well, if I can find an IT manager's kid's name, and I can, this is the Okta support system thing, right? And this is like, hackers are like, the thing that I keep saying, hackers are not breaking into your network. They're just logging in. They're convincing somebody to reset a password and just give them access. Like, they don't have to hack in. And the types of data that you need to get that access is changing. And some of it is personal information.
Yeah, the scariest malware out there, I think, are the info stealers that just sweep up all your OAuth keys, and now they have your logged in sessions.
Yeah. Yep.
Sorry, Sean, you were trying to say
this is fun. I'm going to sleep so well tonight.
Good. I know. I was going to say that. I mean, the Uber breach. The reason why that got so big was because the password file was on a share, and the attackers were able to pull an administrative password for their password manager that had access to Active Directory, their Microsoft Cloud environment, Amazon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just expanded from there. So I mean, there's so much data to mine on file shares in Slack and Teams and whatever else there is now, as you've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Microsoft data leak was something that shouldn't have happened if you were managing your data correctly, right? Like, they wanted to share some ML models that they were working on, so they put the ML models in a bucket, and they thought they shared the file maybe, and they didn't realize the access control gave access to the entire bucket. Wiz figured that out, published it, but what made it really spicy was the fact that there weren't just ML models in there. There were PC backups in there. So the backups of their laptops, their desktops were in there, and they weren't encrypted.
Unencrypted.
So they found auth keys, they found Teams messages, they found like everything bad that was found in that was because PC backups were unencrypted, not where they should have been. Right? Like, data was not where I think anybody would have, if they're really thinking about it, intended to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of this is like, we need to repair the relationship between security and the rest of the enterprise, so they don't see us as the enemy and like the nomad, the people that just come in to say no and kill everybody's dreams and innovation. Because in order to have security as a culture, people need to really believe that it's a worthwhile endeavor and not just a hurdle to all the shit you want to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. So good stuff. So any predictions you want to leave? We actually still do have a few minutes here. If you do, Jackie. Yeah. I would love to hear some predictions.
Well, I can't spoil them all because we're about to publish my team's 2024 predictions. I think we can all see the writing on the wall that next year is going to be tough in the industry, right? There's a lot of consolidation that's already starting to happen, and I think that's going to continue into next year. It'll be really interesting to see what comes of the White House's latest executive order on AI. I read through the briefing on it, and I think it's a good step in the right direction, but next year is going to be, I think, the year of a battle between the courts and regulatory authorities. So we'll see, whether CISA and NIST and all these different government agencies that are now tasked with developing policies and controls around AI, if those policies and controls are all challenged, then that what we've seen a number of times with technology is that the courts step in, and then we unfortunately have very unclear policies. So My prediction is that next year is everybody's focus is going to continue to be on AI, and we're going to start to see the manifestation of both the benefits and security, because I do think there are some companies doing some really interesting things with combating some of the very basic kind of user problems that we were talking about earlier, as well as some of the more interesting uses. Then I also think, boy, this SEC rule, when they initially published it, I was like, oh, snap. That's going to be rough, but I don't think anybody realized how rough it was going to be. And already in just a couple of weeks that we've seen some of these disclosures, I think the interconnectedness of a lot of these problems is going to start to become a lot more clear, like Okta at the center of all of these different breaches and things like that.
Yeah, certainly liability, and we're about to jump into the news segment where we're going to talk about people being personally liable. We're going to talk about, looks like Capital One is going to be forced to share all the details of how the breach happened, process issues and stuff like that, which I'm very excited about because I feel strongly that we need, the incident details for the whole industry to benefit from, and so we can learn from mistakes at scale. It can't be secret. We got to know why people fail. Why companies fail.
Well, and that's like, I had written when I was an analyst, I had written that the reason that attackers are winning is because they're open sourcing everything and working together. And until security is willing to share information and work together, they will continue to win. Because we don't share incoming traffic data amongst the largest enterprises in the country, which we could figure out how to do in a secure way, we don't spot these scattered spider type attacks. We would have identified this months and months ago if we had visibility across, a wide arc of different enterprises in the US, but we just don't have that level of visibility. And where attackers have the level of coordination to be able to pull these attacks off, like maybe I've read The Art of War too many times, but you definitely need to think like your enemy to be able to conquer your enemy. And we are definitely not doing that right now.
Yeah, nobody wants to share. That's certainly an issue. Yeah.
Well, and nobody wants to be liable. To your point, I mean, so the interesting thing, right, is with SolarWinds, and I don't want to steal your news segment, but with the charges there, it's interesting, right? And like the CISO's charged with the CEO is not. And so I think it raises questions about like who ultimately is liable for some of these things at the end of the day, and like to what degree, where's the separation between CISO, CEO, CFO, CTO, and where liability rests. And I think some of these prosecutions are going to have a huge impact on people's willingness to be CISOs, the cost of insurance, personal liability insurance for CISOs. It's I already know, I've already heard from people that it's getting more difficult to get that insurance. So that's a concern.
Yeah, I mean, just getting onboarded as a CISO, like I've heard from a lot of my friends, it's just it's months of redlining contracts back and forth, and like it takes months just to onboard somebody in that position when it's like a true executive level CISO role. But to throw out another example, in the case of Drizzly, it was the CEO that was sanctioned. Not that I don't know if they had a CISO or not, but yeah, it went a little differently in that case.
Yeah, and that's where I think like we have to have clear. I don't know. There needs to be some clear policies around this, and I would rather that not happen through. I'd rather that happen through policymaking and legislation than court decision, but oftentimes that's the way it's going to happen. So there has to be a balance, right? There has to be a balance between CISOs being held accountable for the decisions they make, but also giving them enough support to make decisions, tough decisions, because you can't anticipate everything. You just can't. And so I think, I don't know. It's this year is going to be. I think it's going to be a rough year in the market, and I think it's going to be an even rougher year in security.
It's going to be spicy for sure, and This is great. Maybe we'll have you back on next year as we start to see some of your predictions unfold and see some of the trends start to reveal themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, really enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, same here. Same here. This was great. And stick around. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.